Destination people always seem to find the magic and the mystery in this beautiful world. Don't get left behind.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Tom Anderson, and this is Webinar on Wednesday with Destinations Together. As always, a warm welcome to the Zoom listeners today and the cruise line executives that are tuning in. The cruise industry has enjoyed a positive restart primarily in Asia and Europe, featuring cruises to nowhere and the infamous cruise bubble experience. And if the CDC lifts the no sail order, the industry is poised for a staggered restart in North America. Yet paradoxically, the CDC has just issued a warning advising US travelers to defer all cruise travel. Mixed messages indeed. Today's webinar focuses on the results of an ongoing survey from the University of Florida, Go Gators, which started 8 months ago at the beginning of the pandemic. This survey aims, over time, to gauge anxiety level as it relates to the travel interest and travel motivation of North Americans in this pandemic environment. There's no doubt that Americans want to step away from their computers and actually travel, yet they want to do so safely. Back on the 6th of May, Dr. Lori Pennington-Gray from the University of Florida provided us with the results of this ongoing survey, and today she is back with Destinations Together to provide an update as we hopefully near the restart of cruising in the Caribbean region. At the same time, there are many factors that could impact the travel industry. The number of COVID cases are increasing in the US. The flu season is just starting. We're receiving mixed messages from CDC. There is talk that France and Germany may impose lockdowns. And here in the United States, we're in the midst of a contentious national election. So there's a lot for our expert speaker from the University of Florida to unpack. Today's presentation is hosted by Destinations Together, which is an open platform of relevant information and collaboration to support the tourism industry. It is designed to help everyone connect, collaborate, and hopefully find solutions to bridge the gap until cruise ships and tourism return to the region. As a reminder, both Larry and I have a wealth of experience in the cruise industry, especially as it relates to destinations and shore excursions. Specifically, we focus on the development of guest experiences, destination analysis, product development, business strategy, and more. Please contact Larry and me directly to discuss the specifics of your business so we can assist you in a more individualized and focused way. I'll turn this over to Larry to share some important information and then introduce our guest speaker for today's Destinations Together webinar on Wednesday. Larry?
Hey, thanks, Tom. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. First off, let me recognize the webinar we had from last week, Tour and Port Operations, Best Practices from Europe with Mark Robinson, Head of Business Development for Global Port Holdings, who moderated the session along with Stephen Schwab, COO of Global Port Holdings and CEO of Valletta Cruise Port, and also with us was Sam Misid, Managing Director of SMS Travel and Tourism. Take a look at the link of the webinar. It's worth a listen for sure. Before we begin, let me remind you of a few housekeeping notes. We are recording the webinar and we'll upload it on our website in the next few days. As always, if you have a question, please post it to the Q&A box. Also, for the first time ever, we will allow a few attendees to join us live to ask Lori their questions directly. So if you are interested in asking your question live, simply send the message to the panelist, your question in the chat box. Use the chat box, please, to ask any questions for the presenter. We will advise you directly if we will bring you on live to broadcast your question. Please remember, we and our guests are only providing our opinions and possible sources for further intel. Lori, we're pleased to have you with us, and please join me as I do a quick introduction. We are delighted to have Dr. Lori Pennington-Gray, Ph.D., Professor and Director of Tourism Crisis Management Initiative at the University of Florida, back with us today to discuss and showcase her most recent travel survey update of her ongoing survey research on how the pandemic is impacting the anxiety level and travel interest of North America. If you missed Lori's update on May 6th, Tourism in Crisis, Strategy and Next Steps, and have an interest to see the video, please check out our website. Lori, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you open up your PowerPoint and share away. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Larry. It is so wonderful to be back and share our updates with you. This has been exciting as our ongoing research has brought many insights for the industry and where we're headed. We have been collecting, as Larry mentioned, since January 23rd. That was our first wave. At that point, we did not collect weekly. It was still in its infancy, and it wasn't really on the shores of the United States yet. So we were really looking at international travel at that time and trying to understand where we were headed with regards to the virus and potential impact of Chinese visitors to the US. Little did we know that at the beginning of March, we were going to have an unprecedented decision to lock down and stay in our homes. At that point, we had already started to collect a few weeks, and we were looking at collecting weekly to help the industry to understand decisions, attitudes, behaviors, potential behaviors from the traveling public, and what might be anticipated when travel were to open up again. We are still looking at many of the same variables that we have looked at since the beginning, but we also integrate new questions and new things that are related, that are current. For example, the questions I'll present today are phrased in a way that they were phrased in the first survey. We do this so that we can actually compare among the different waves, and the questions remain the same, and so we control for variability. We also have added other types of questions to help to understand what some of those things might mean, and we take some questions out, we add them, we work regularly with the survey to try and understand how things are changing regularly. So you can see from the slide here that, you know, I have each week and the sample size across the weeks. We have a very large data set right now. We have also merged data across different waves so that we can look at it monthly. We can also look at it quarterly, etc. And so we hope that this immense amount of data will be beneficial to people as they start to think through what has changed, what is enduring in these attitudes, and where they might need to go to be responsive to the traveling public. So just really briefly to talk a little bit about what we have as far as the methodology. Our survey is collected again weekly, and we have two qualifying questions. So they must agree that they are currently residing in the United States, and they also have to agree that they were planning to travel in the next 6 to 12 months. We wanted to capture those that were travelers and not just anybody in the population. So they need to meet those criteria, and then from there, we ask them a series of questions. The survey takes about 15 minutes to complete. Again, we're looking at a 500 sample size each time that we collect the data. We launch it typically on a Sunday, and then we stop collecting when we get to the 500 mark in order to run the report. But we allow the survey to continue to be responded to. And so sometimes those numbers increase, as you saw in the previous slide. And so we can have sometimes up to 800, 900 responses for one wave. And that's why those numbers are different. But in order to be responsive and have the reports available weekly, whatever we have by the Monday or late Monday is what we use to produce the reports and to look at our travel anxiety index, which is a contributor to information that is not being provided by anybody else in the travel industry. So let's look a little bit at this index. The index was really derived out of understanding that risk is a series of cognitive and affective responses to things that are happening. Most of the time, we are asking people to talk about how that risk impacts their travel at the time. And when we entered into the COVID crisis, we realized that much of the research related to anxiety, worry, and fear had not been measured related to travel. And this was a perfect time for us to be able to start to understand how these things factored into people's perceptions about travel, particularly when we were in a position where we were not traveling at all. So how was that anxiety then impacting people's perceptions about travel? So this is the collection over time. And what's important to note here is that as the data is collected, it is correlated with other things that are happening. Particularly what we've found is that as major increases in cases happen, we see anxiety rises. As we see that the cases are starting to decline and we're starting to see that states are opening up, then we start to see less anxiety. A notable point here on the index is when President Trump went into the hospital, which is noticed by this last star on the chart in October the 5th. And we see that from that point on, we have seen that anxiety has started to increase. That is also correlated with the number of cases that are on the rise that we just heard Tom mention. And so in the US, we're starting to see cases in, I believe this morning they said 40 states had increasing numbers of cases that were occurring. And so this weekend, as we collect the data, we hypothesize again that that anxiety will increase as a result of that. Some of it is anxiety due to not understanding the implications of where we're going and where we're headed and how that's going to impact our travel. And some of it is related to the anxiety that they have that is part of what the media is providing to us. So just heightened attention to the virus makes us more anxious. And we know that that is happening due to the amount of mental health conversations that are happening as this virus in the US prolongs. And so it's, again, not surprising that this follows a very similar curve to the number of cases that we're seeing. What's interesting is also the relationship between what people are perceiving to be anxiety towards international travel versus anxiety towards domestic travel. And this slide indicates that in the US right now, people are expressing higher levels of anxiety. And so these are three different data points, with wave 10 being on the far left and wave 32, which is the most recent, being on the right. And that we have this increase in numbers, meaning that we're seeing in time for both international and domestic, that people are a little more relaxed about travel, but that has declined again from this wave that just happened in wave 30th, which was the end of September. So again, this ebb and flow related to the number of cases, and we should expect that, again, both feelings towards domestic and international will continue to rise in the next week. We also ask about future travel or anticipated feelings towards travel in the next 6 months. We're trying to get a feeling for what people think is going to happen, what's on the horizon. And again, we see a very similar pattern here where the respondents are suggesting that, these levels of anxiety are decreasing from the September wave, but again, that we'll expect that it will increase. But overall, that there was this decline, and we will continue to watch what's happening and what people are feeling with regards to traveling both internationally and domestically. When we met in May and presented, we wanted to also share with you thoughts about international travel in countries that were perceived to be riskier than other countries. And so we had 18 countries that we asked about. And as you can tell from this slide, the green 2 countries, Canada and Australia, were perceived to be the safest countries to travel to, whereas China was perceived to be the least safe place to travel to. We also pulled out those that were possibly more relevant to some of the viewers, and so we have on this also something that we know to be true from the previous data and previous research related to gender, that we wanted to know what men versus women were thinking about safety issues. And so most of the results you can see by the square box are that the variability is fairly flat, that it doesn't vary too much, but women tend to express higher levels of concern than men do. And that females were expressing that their highest levels of safety or perceived safety were with the Bahamas. That's an interesting finding. We tried to look a little bit to understand why that was. Perceived risk is also related to familiarity. For the US population, the Bahamas is a more familiar destination. So we anticipate that some of this is fueled by understanding and knowing that destination a little better than some of the other destinations as a whole on the US population. But if we really wanted to dig into it, we'd have to look at more variables as well. The next question we wanted to know was related to age. We know that the COVID-19 has had a higher impact with people 65 years and older. We know that there's expressed levels of concern with this age group. And so we wanted to ask about perceptions of safety of different countries, and how people felt traveling to those countries based on their age. And you can see that across the board, people felt that that if they were 65 years and older, they expressed lower levels of safety or more anxiety than their younger counterparts about traveling to those destinations. This is what we would expect. What we didn't really expect, because we've heard a lot also on the news about this younger generation, the millennials, that we had those between 18 and 24 years of age. We expected those findings to say that they felt safer than the 25 to 34-year-olds, but you can see from the data that that's not the case. It's the 25 to 34-year-olds that are saying that these destinations are the most safe. Again, we look at previous data and previous research that's related to risk and risky behavior. And the things that might be correlated with this include previous travel experience and knowledge. And so we would expect that it's because this population knows more about the destinations and are more familiar with the travel process, that their levels of safety may be a little bit higher. So I'd like to take a a moment now and stop here and invite Larry back to coordinate some questions that you might have related to the data that I just presented.
Thanks, Lori. I've got one person from St. Lucia, Eleanor, that I'm going to go ahead and bring on live and let her ask you the question.
Okay.
Eleanor, welcome. Unmute Eleanor and turn your video on if you would. Eleanor, if you can unmute and turn, there you are.
She is.
There you go. Can't hear you, Eleanor. Still can't hear you. No, maybe you need a headset connected or something.
Or not.
Not working, Eleanor. Nope, it's not. You want to send me the question in chat and I'll go ahead and ask it.
There we go.
You there? Nope. Can't hear you, Eleanor. I'm going to let you go ahead and send it to me in chat, and then I'll ask Lori the question for you. Okay. Thank you for trying. Tom, were there any questions on your end you want to ask Lori?
Yeah, we have one question here from Gabriel, which kind of I think goes to the to how the study's put together, and I think he's asking a question that you may or may not be able to respond to. But all the stats that we see in the media mention the number of cases, but considering less tests equal less cases, do you have any data that you could show us, or that show a correlation of tests versus cases?
No, that we are not engaged in measuring and documenting the number of cases at all. When I looked at the correlation between travel anxiety and the number of cases, I pulled the data from the CDC website to look at that. That's not something we're collecting. Okay,
and then here's a question from Alejandro, and I suspect you'll be talking about this a little bit later, but this person says, hi, do you know, especially how will this behavior impact the cruise line industry? And I think you have some stats on that later.
Yep, that's a great question. And we will go over questions related to avoiding certain activities when they travel. And so I'll be delving into more specific behaviors in the next few slides.
And that's all I have at this time.
Okay, and I've got Eleanor's question for you, Lori.
Okay.
Based on the survey, what is seen as the greatest anxiety levels towards travel, and in particular to the Caribbean? And then also, is there a higher interest in cruising?
Again, we're going to get into the results of more specific activities, and cruising is one of them that we'll discuss. So with regards to anxiety in general, travel anxiety is usually fueled by increased perception of risk. And when we're looking at decreasing anxiety, we're looking at mitigating risk and risky behaviors. And so there's different ways to do that. And again, we're going to have a battery of questions that talk about what the industry can do in order to do that, and then what the traveler can do. And it's a combination of both of those things. It's not just one responsibility for one of those entities. Both the traveler as well as the industry needs to participate in that in order to reduce the anxiety.
That's it on my end.
Okay.
Thank you, Lori.
Thanks. All right, so let's move on then, and we're going to look at some of the things that are related to insights about future travel and what travelers are expecting and what the public is expecting with regards to when the industry will be back to normal. And so our first slide then is looking at where you're likely to travel when restrictions are lifted. And you can see that this is fairly flat. We don't have a huge amount of variation in time 1 and time 2, or in May and in October. There is this increased and a larger percentage of respondents that say they will travel domestically. Some of that is still because we're in a situation where the future is unknown, and some of the restrictions are still variable. One of the things I pulled up today was looking even just across the states in the US, and is there one go-to place where people can find information on what the expectations of the visitors are? So are there any restrictions or not? And if there are, what are they? So do they have to have a PCR test before they can come in? Does it have to be done 72 hours in advance or not? Do they have to have a quarantine period when they come to the destination? Is it going to be in the hotel? Is it managed? All these questions are questions that the traveling public wrestles with regularly when they think about travel. So if we look at how that impacts international travel, those are the kinds of things where people say it's hard enough to figure out if I'm staying in my own state, what it's going to look like. That's one more layer of complexity that I need to deal with if I'm looking to go international. And so I think that's what some of this is. And then I think also it's about just managing that anxiety and understanding, you know, what they're going to do to address their innate need to travel, and therefore also maintain their safety and how they can do this. And so that my expectation is that that domestic response is because of those things, and that will change over time as we have a vaccine and as more people travel and there's less implications of that. And the industry has engaged in successful case management where they can say, look, we've had X amount of people come and nobody has contracted the virus, or the method that we've chosen is the most successful, etc. So I think that will start to change over time, but for right now, it's fairly plateaued. We also asked, when do you think the coronavirus will be contained or under control? And again, these words, we use them at the beginning and we're continuing to use them because of being able to compare these things in different timeframes. And so you can see here from the slide that the majority are saying that it's going to be in 2021 sometime. That is also correlated with the availability of a safe vaccine that people feel that they'll be able to take. And so it has shifted. As you can see, people thought back in May that by October, we were going to be in a position where things would be fairly back to normal. The sad state of affairs is that that's not the case. And now we're looking into the future sometime in 2021 and potentially even longer than that. So we'll have to wait and see how this changes over time. But again, it will become more specific with 2021 in the next few surveys so that we can actually pinpoint whether they're saying early, mid, or late 2021 in their thought as well. We also wanted to look at when they thought the tourism industry was going to be back. And again, the response is very similar, 2021, and that hasn't really changed very much over time in the 3 waves. It's a little bit less than at the beginning of September, again, as cases start to grow and we have more of them, then this is going to impact that as well, because people aren't sure whether there will be another lockdown as what they're facing possibly in Europe right now, what that might look like, or whether there's going to be some more restrictions by destination and what that will look like, etc. So there are also a number of experts that are suggesting that this recovery could take between 3 and 5 years, and tourism economics predicts that global travel demand won't even resume until 2023. And it could be even into the 2025 before we see normal resumed activity in the travel industry. We also wanted to know when people were going to actually travel once they felt it was safe to travel. And we know that certain people are already traveling and that they were looking to travel as soon as things opened up, and that there are a number of destinations in the US that have had successful tourism demand over the last few months in the summertime, and it's waned a little bit now into September, but coastal destinations, bed and breakfasts, we saw Airbnb say that they had some of the highest record number of occupancy bookings and fulfillment that they've had ever, and that's because people did want to get out and travel. They're looking for safe ways to travel. So this is not much different if you look at when it's contained or when it's managed, or when we've moved through recovery and we're into resuming more normal travel behaviors. Most people will wait 2 to 6 months before they actually start to plan their future travel and what that will look like. And 90% of the respondents said that they expect to plan future travel, and 10% said that they would wait. Again, how soon after the virus is contained do you expect to plan for business? It's very similar. We know that people are saying that it'll be 2 to 6 months. Again, there are reports that suggest that that will also be 3 to 5 years. McKinsey had a report out that suggested that that was going to be closer to 5 years, and that people that were traveling for business were going to be under other kinds of constraints that impact their business travel. And that has an implication for leisure, which is the combination of business and leisure travel that some of you might see in your businesses, where people are traveling for business and then they tack on an extra day or two or a weekend for leisure, and they bring a spouse or children. And so as this extended amount of time is projected for business travel, then leisure travel will subsequently also be impacted. And do they have higher expectations for sanitation if they're traveling internationally than if they're traveling in the US? And similar to when we spoke in May, people do have higher expectations. In fact, it's up 17.4% from May. And we expect that some of that is because overall, we're starting to see that there's expectations that that it's not specific to international, that in general, if we ask people, do you have higher expectations for sanitation when you travel, that people are expressing that they are. So again, let's stop here. And if people have questions, then we can answer those related to the slides that I just presented.
Okay.
Larry?
Lori, I do have one here, and then maybe one from the last set of slides, if I can do that.
Yep.
First one is why do you think people have higher expectations for sanitation if they are traveling internationally?
That's a great question. And I think, for the most part, what we're seeing with the travel locally is that it's a drive market. And many of the people that are taking trips are doing so in their own vehicles. And I also believe that many people are packing their cleaning products with them. So again, if we look at the health belief model and we look at the research related to risk and risky behavior and personal protection behavior. When people have the opportunity to engage in behaviors that they think can keep themselves safe, that reduces the amount of risk. And so I believe that when they put their cleaning supplies in their car and take it with them, whether they use that in paid accommodations or commercial accommodations, or whether it's in our shared accommodations, or even staying at a secondary home, that they're carrying those things with them so that they can clean the environment before they enter and live in that environment for that short trip that they're taking. It is much more difficult to do that when you're traveling internationally. It doesn't mean that it's not possible and people won't do it. They may bring their wipes with them. But if people are really looking at sanitation, then they're putting their bleach products in there, and their wipes, and things that they can spray the room with, and maybe even an air purifier. So those things are constrained when you're traveling internationally, if you're not traveling by car. And so with borders closed to Canada, and most of the travel internationally would be expressed and correlated with air travel. And therefore, I think this is what's playing into the perception that they expect the industry to fill that gap that they cannot do for themselves.
Got it. This is one from your earlier set of slides. Any variability in anxiety results based on household income?
We have that data. I actually did not run it for the presentation, but I could do that and add it. And when we post this presentation, we could have that additional slide. That's a really great question. It was not hypothesized that income is driving this, and therefore that's why I didn't look at it, but it would be interesting to know whether that is true or not. So okay. I'll go and do that because that's a great question.
Super, thank you. That's it.
Larry, I have one other one that kind of came in with the registrations. This particular person, Karen, is involved with a special needs group. Do you have any data that relates specifically to those traveling with special needs?
That's a great question. And no, that's not something that we've been asking, but that is something I think is important, and a market that has not been addressed to the extent that it needs to. So I'm going to make a personal commitment to ensure that we include that in future questions in the survey. That's a great question. Thank you for that, Karen. Okay.
I think that's it. Thank you, Lori.
Okay, so let's move to changes in behavior. This is where some of those questions have already come from with regards to anticipated travel behaviors and what people are looking to do, what makes them feel safe, things that they would avoid. And these are mentioned in the negative, but the flip side of these would be the positive, obviously. So here's a list of a number of activities that we have been asking about since the beginning of the survey. These are 2 data points. You can see that they have changed. Most of them have increased in avoidance rather than decreased. That is something that is different than what we have expected. But I think it's also linked to what people are hearing as precautionary behaviors from the CDC. So you can see that I've circled in a red circle and put a bubble above it that outdoor festivals is the only activity that sees a decrease in avoidance, because that's what we're hearing, right? We're hearing that it's safer to be outside most of the time if we're still social distancing. It's safer to be not confined to enclosed areas. And so when people hear the messaging, which is, I think, a result of the public health messaging that's happening in the US on a regular basis, their responses to this survey are a function of that. And so when they are asked about things like trains or public transportation or hop off buses or motor coaches, that we're seeing an increase. Now, again, if you look at the number of people that say they're going to avoid this in general, we're only talking about a third of the population. So a third will avoid it, but 2/3 are going to engage in it. So if they're going to, then it becomes important that we're also finding ways to keep them safe when they do that. So again, this information that is being provided to them as to what they can do, and also communicating what the industry is doing to also keep them safe. So I don't want to alert anybody to concerns that there isn't demand to do these things. There is. It's just that it's the numbers that are saying they're avoiding things that are inside has increased, and that makes sense.
Lori, sorry to interrupt.
Yep.
Just real quick, can you just comment on cruise and airlines on that particular slide? Were those increases sort of what you would have anticipated, or were you a little bit surprised by that?
Well, with the cruise travel, again, I think, there's enough information that, people are saying, yes, I might want to travel again, but I need to know that if I'm going to engage in travel, that I'm going to be safe when I do it. And so remember, this survey is going out to a random sample of respondents that have traveled before. It doesn't mean they're a cruising population. They're not those that are saying that's the type of trip that I want to take. So I don't think that it's necessarily concerning that there isn't a market that's willing to cruise. In general, again, it comes down to familiarity and also information. And so I think what we see here is an opportunity to also start to decrease anxiety and find a way to share with them what the practices and procedures are that are being implemented to keep the visitors safe. And so again, it's going to be much more of a public service information pushed out to people so that they're aware that that type of travel is not concerning, and that the industry is doing what they need to do to keep people safe. I know that I looked online today, and the U.S. Travel Association was doing a webinar on air travel. And I think air travel is similar in people's perceptions, and people are thinking maybe this is the riskier part of the experience. So it really becomes important to not only say what you're doing, but also use research to and science to document what is happening. I know that the airline industry is very familiar with this. They talk about the number of flights they take and how many incidents or accidents occur. And then they compare it to, car traffic accidents. So I think we're in a similar situation where the industry needs to start to provide that information to the general public so that they have things to compare to, so that they can understand the level of risk and then make decisions as a result of that. Tom?
Great, thank you. All set.
Okay, so let's talk then about all things related to the travel experience. I've been hinting at some of these things as well. We asked questions related. These are personal protection behaviors. They're things that people can engage in on their own that would keep them safe. And in the past, when we did research related to hurricanes or Zika, people weren't as familiar with ways that they could keep themselves safe. It was really important that the CDC gave them information, and then the industry said, okay, we also are going to provide that information. But with the influx of information that people are receiving regularly on every news source, social media, the internet. People are fairly familiar with things that they can do to keep themselves safe, and the constant messaging related to wearing a mask, sanitizing, washing your hands, social distancing. These things now are part of our vernacular. And therefore, when we ask them questions related to, are you likely to avoid areas that that you might enjoy because there's a greater risk of getting COVID, then people can say yes, because I've been told to do that. And I know that those are cases or incidents where I have less control over whether I get the virus or not. So I'm going to stay away. Looking at policies that businesses have created around COVID-19, similarly, more people are saying, yes, this is a practice that I would engage in because it's important, because I would like to know for myself what I need to do, but I also want to know what they're expecting me to do and what they're doing on their side. And so more people are saying they're doing that. And these are mean scores that move from 3.9 to 3.91. Not a big jump, staying fairly high, but we're still seeing that people are saying that these are important behaviors to engage in. The one behavior here that decreased in avoidance here, or in their likelihood of doing this, is making sure the destination that they're planning to visit has implemented measures. And we have looked at this a little bit, and I think what's happening here is that many of the destinations are doing this already. And so there isn't going to be a lot of variability between destinations as far as, who's doing what. The travel industry knows that they need to have practices and policies and measures that will keep them safe. So they're not going to necessarily they're not going to find a lot of cases where that's not the case. There will be different degrees of what the destinations are doing, and that will be part of the decision-making factor. But in general, I think the industry's done a really good job at saying, yeah, we know that we need to do these things. And so we have more people that are enforcing social distancing, or we have sanitation practices and access to hand sanitizer. And we have somebody that's telling people that they should wear their mask, pull your mask up, don't wear it below your chin, things like that. So I think it's more about the norm here than this decline that we're seeing. In general, people are saying, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do more than what I was going to do in May because I know more about what I need to do. Using a travel agent to streamline information. Again, now we've moved along the crisis management phases, and we're more into a recovery phase. And so people are saying, as I'm starting to plan what I need to do, I probably need to start looking at travel agents as a way to manage the entire travel experience, so that should something happen, I'm in a position to be able to evacuate if necessary, or change my travel plans, etc. The industry has responded very well at saying that there's not a change fee a lot of times with the airlines, things like that. But in general, we are in an industry where we have multiple touch points. And so, we might remember to do one thing and forget something else. And so a travel agent, I think, is a way to kind of pull all of the experiences and the entire travel experience together in one place, one-stop shopping, to help to coordinate that. Interestingly, we'll go through this as far as staycations. We're seeing that more people are agreeing with the statement that they're more likely to take a staycation. I also would like to share that staycations have been used in a variety of different ways. Some people think it means that they're not going to leave out of their home. And originally, there was some media response to what a staycation was that said, instead of travel, we're going to, build a man cave, or, put a garden in, or, renovate our house. But things have evolved since 2008, when the term was initially used. And people now are saying that a staycation is sometimes a day trip, sometimes things that are drive travel within a closer vicinity. It's not that long haul travel that that is the opposite of what this staycation would be perceived as. And so again, this increase in people that say that they're going to agree, that they agree that they're going to take a staycation, or that it's more likely in the past, is notable. And it's also, again, important to notice that 39.4% are saying that. So it's not more than 50%. It's not, 90% of the responses, but it's significant enough that people are starting to say, between at least 50% between the agrees and strongly agrees are going to consider taking a staycation rather than taking a longer trip.
Hey, Lori,
Mm-hmm.
sorry to interrupt, but just want to let you know we're at 2:50 right now.
Okay.
So we're going to pass up on the questions for the rest of your slides, and then we'll go towards the end, okay?
Okay, that works.
Thank you.
All right, so let's look at more likely to take a trip where they don't have to fly. This is, again, something that's consistent with what I was talking about earlier, that 41% suggest that they would avoid flying. Again, it's important that the industry find ways to communicate what they're doing to keep people safe, and also how many people are flying and how many cases are not happening because when they're flying. So again, communicating the successes of those that are traveling in the industry or those that are participating, so that people have an idea of the incident rate in those types of activities. We talked a little bit about this. I'm more likely to avoid areas I might really enjoy because of the increased risk. I think, again, this will change. It's probably going to change as we have a vaccine. And also as we start to learn more from destinations and the industry about, the number of people that are coming and doing activities, and there hasn't been an increase. I'll use the COVID response of a travel company to help me decide whether to book business with them. This is something we've been talking about for years. I think more than ever, people are watching. There's this notion of corporate social responsibility. We're seeing it with regards to ecotourism, green practices, sustainable tourism, and also in the idea that they want to know people are keeping them safe. And so as this number, we'll watch it over time as we see that it's nearing 50%, over 60% in the agree and strongly agree. It's more important than ever that businesses are engaged in some type of corporate social responsible messaging about what they're doing, how they're engaging with the communities, what they're looking at to keep them safe, what policies they're using and practices they're engaging in. All right, so we'll move past this one and move on to the last battery of slides. We'll here talk about insights into operational practices that are expected. I've mentioned a few of these, and one of the things, again, we have asked in the past is, are people expecting to pay more for travel-related experiences based on increased protocols, such as adhering to social distancing, extensive sanitation practices, providing guests with PPE possibly, protocols, standards, etc. And again, here we're at 74%. This is amazing that people know that this is going to be the case. There is also this double-edged sword. They know that prices may go up, but there's also the other side of people's pocketbook that is being affected by, being out of work, being furloughed, not being able to go back to their jobs, etc. And so there's multiple things that are impacting their likelihood to travel in the future. And so they are aware that things may be more expensive, but whether they're able to travel because of their personal financial situation is another thing that we need to look at. And we do ask that, although I haven't presented it. So there, we know that people's finances are affecting a large number of the population. This slide again has a number of different things that the industry can engage in. And interesting, there's a dichotomy here between what people say that they're going to do and then things that they expect the industry to do. Almost across the board here, we see a decrease in wave 32 in the expectation of what the industry needs to do to keep people safe. It doesn't mean that they aren't expecting it, because if you look at the numbers, they're all over 70% that expects that the industry is going to do something to keep them safe. But I think what we're seeing here is possibly two things: that people know the industry is doing a good job, and so that expectation might be being downplayed because they know that it's happening. And the other is that it was heightened in May because we weren't really sure. If you remember, that was when we were concerned that, people that were getting food delivered to the house would have to, clean the bags and, clean down the outside of the food containers, much more transmission hand to hand than maybe what we're seeing now. And so this not knowing also heightened expectations of what needed to happen in the industry when people were going to travel. Also, I think we're seeing more onus being put on the traveler themselves, just as I mentioned with personal protection behavior. And so people are realizing that they play a role in their own safety and that they have things that they need to do. And they're willing to do so, wearing masks. We do see this dichotomy again in the US, but for the most part, as they're engaging in checking websites, using travel agencies, getting insurance. They're doing things that they will do to protect themselves in the long run. So those numbers go up, and these numbers of what the industry is doing slightly down, but overall, knowing that it's a combination of both of these that play a role in our safety. So the next few slides are all the same. The desire is gone down from 5 months ago, as I just mentioned, providing hand sanitizers, but they're still very high in the expectation. All of them over 70, some of them closer to 80%, et cetera. This one's close to 80% for disinfectant wipes. Wiping down surfaces, again, almost 80% of, feel that this needs to be done. And just closer to 74% here with staggered seating. So all of these things then we placed in an infographic for the industry to share with other industry stakeholders. These are the kinds of things that we need to think about when we're planning for welcoming guests and engaging in these kinds of behaviors, because this is what our consumer is telling us that they want from us. So feel free to use this, share it, and use it to help to think through the kinds of things that you might need to engage in and share with your consumer that you're doing, so it reinforces that they're coming to a safe environment. Again, where do they want to see this information? Well, for the most part, they want to see it a variety of places. They realize that what's notable about this slide is that the majority here is in the pre-planning phase. The other 10 items that are listed are all on site. And you can see that the pre-planning information has become more important, and that more people are saying that they would like to receive that information prior to travel. It doesn't mean, again, that it won't get reinforced during the travel experience, but sending that information on a confirmation prior to travel, whether that's through the email that's sent out or paper tickets that they still may receive, just reinforcing what the policies are, what the industry is doing in the destinations that you're traveling to, whether there are different expectations or requirements for different ports, all of these things ahead of time so that the traveler can then manage that when they're on site, and then reminders throughout the travel process as well. Again, we created a little infographic reminding people, having printed materials in hotel rooms, verbal confirmation by frontline staff, on tickets while in the destination, signage, TV messages in hotel rooms, signs in the lobbies, etc., which most of you are doing and we need to continue to do. So we're going to move through and do the top 3 takeaways, and then I'd be happy to take questions as we move towards the end of our time. People are anxious about traveling still. It's correlated with the number of expressed cases that they're hearing about in the United States. They rise and fall related to the number of cases. The US population has fewer expectations that the industry increases protocols than they did 5 months ago. Again, they're still high that they expect it, with 3/4 expecting more from the industry in terms of safety than prior to the pandemic. But that there's this expectation that they can also participate in personal protection behaviors that they would engage in to help to mitigate the risk. So knowledge and awareness of what they can do personally, as well as what is going to happen in the destination collectively, are pieces of information that can be shared through your business so that the consumer realizes what needs to be done and that you're also doing your part in keeping people safe. This can be reinforced in a positive way and sent out prior to travel. But definitely, this is not going away. I think that just because we're in the pandemic doesn't mean that people's perceptions of safe travel behaviors and what the industry's role in keeping people safe is here to stay. It's not going to be just related to health concerns. It's going to be across the board. People are aware now that they can do things to help to mitigate risk, and that the industry can too. And with the advent and the constant messaging and information flow with the internet, we see more than ever that people are going to the internet to get information ahead of time. And if it's not there, then it causes more concern. And that anxiety increases, and thereby the amount of confirmed bookings would decrease because people are too anxious about making that decision. In the end, it's going to be, the destinations that do the best job of sharing what they're doing and creating practices to keep people safe that people will end up choosing. And if they feel that there isn't enough being done to keep them safe, then they're going to pick your competitor. And so it's going to be part of that decision-making process that was there before, but now it's more heightened than ever. So now I guess I'll turn it back to Tom or Larry, and I'm happy to answer a few questions if we have time.
Wow, you've covered a lot. That survey is very, very detailed, and I know there's even more that we could dig through. We have gone over, and so we're going to try to ask a couple quick questions because they have come in. We want to try to make sure everyone gets a chance to participate one way or the other. Maria asked the following question: is the data reported on cruise travel has a correlation with CDC warnings lately on the cruise industry?
No, we don't have that. But again, that's something that we could do, and I know that Tom and Larry and I have talked about that. So that let's make a note of that.
Yeah, it seems like there probably would be. My gut tells me logically there would be a correlation. Mm-hmm. And Larry, did you have another question you wanted to ask?
Yeah, I'm going to bring Raphael in live. So stand by. Here we go. Could I ask you a question, Lori?
Okay.
Raphael, you with us?
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
How are you, Lori?
Thank you. How are you?
Good. I think at some point one of the questions was that at what point after the virus is confined, are you willing to travel or something?
Yeah.
Did you ask by any chance what do you think that what is the point that you think the virus is confined? Is it when the vaccine is on? Is it at what point do people think the virus is controlled or confined?
That's a great question. And as I mentioned, when we first started doing the data collection, the vaccine was not a huge conversation piece. And obviously in the last month, it's been heightened tremendously, especially in the US news. So I would say that we don't ask specifically about the vaccine as it relates to that question. And we could ask a separate question related to that, but it's a trade-off in the data collection. If we change the wording now, even though in the consumer's mind, they're saying probably they're thinking vaccine now, and they may not have been thinking it in the past. That's a contextual thing. If we change the wording, then we wouldn't statistically be able to actually look at the difference. So we do have another question that we can run that's just related to the vaccine, and we could just report that, but we didn't have that back in May. So agreed, it's definitely confined or contained is now what people assume means having a vaccine that is safe and able to be pushed out and taken by the majority of the population so that they can stay safe.
Thank you.
Good
Sure.
question.
Thanks, Raphael.
Raphael, thank you so much. I just lost internet.
Uh-oh.
I'm back.
Okay.
Raphael, thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks. Lori, what can I say? Thank you. This has been an awesome presentation, definitely filled with lots of great data. Thanks to the audience for sticking with us. We still have a huge crowd, so appreciate that. And we will have Lori's PowerPoint available that we will put onto the website. So please look for it there. But again, Lori, thanks so much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
We'll keep you posted on our next webinar, and please look out for a survey that Tom and I are going to send to you to share with us what's important to you and what can we do to bring to you for future webinars. Again, please visit us at our website, www.destinationstogether.com, to see all of our past and future webinars, and please don't hesitate to share the website with others. It is open to everybody. As a reminder, both Tom and I have a wealth of experience in the cruise industry, especially as it relates to destinations and shore excursions. Destinations Together has a large network of individuals, talents, can focus on development of guest experiences, destination analysis, product development, industrial engineering, business and social media strategy, and more. Please contact Tom and I directly to talk this through. Many thanks to all of you for your continued support. Tom and I appreciate it. Be strong, be safe, be healthy. Lori, again, thanks for today. That was fantastic. Tom?
Lori, thank you very much. Thanks to everyone for sticking with us through what was a pretty long session, but lots of detail. And look at the PowerPoint because there's going to be lots of questions I'm sure you want to study in there. Thank you all very much. Thanks for your support.
Destination together, won't you set me free? I'll take a train, a plane, a big cruise ship, it doesn't really matter to me. Destination people always seem to find the magic and the mystery in this beautiful world. Don't get left behind.